The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Legal Affairs and Information of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Legal Affairs and Information of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, St. Vincent and the Grenadines congratulates His Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis of Trinidad and Tobago, for his country's assumption of the presidency of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We affirm, too, our solidarity with the governments and peoples of the Kingdom of Morocco and Libya at this their current hour of peril, consequent upon the recent natural disasters. We express sincerest condolences for the immense loss of lives. Your Excellencies, across the world today, in large measure, men and women are pained, gripped with melancholy, and are adrift. They are perplexed, even confused, at the complexities and challenges of our human condition, which is awash with multiple contradictions, from which arise a yearning for sustainable resolutions. Large numbers of people globally are possessed of an admixture of resignation, a sense of futility, a routinization of indifference, even cynicism. And yet, at the same time, there is resident in them, in us, an elemental hopefulness and a sense of social solidarity, a search for justice and goodness, a pursuance of equity and equality, and a quest for peace, security, and prosperity for all, not only for a privileged few in a handful of privileged nations. It is widely acknowledged that the global political economy is broken and needs fixing, not by tinkering here and there, but through fundamental restructuring of a kind that endures for the benefit of all humanity, especially those who are disadvantaged, dispossessed, or marginalized. It is widely accepted, too, that the vital sustainable development goals will not be attained by 2030. Indeed, there will be a significant deficit for practically every developing country. Similarly, it is widely recognized that the climate change agenda is stalling, in some respects reversing, with dire consequences for humanity practically in most of the vulnerable countries. At the same time, war and conflict rage senselessly across the globe. In at least one case, Ukraine, the principal adversaries may unwittingly open the gates to a nuclear Armageddon. Contemporary drivers of insecurity and conflict are all jostling in an invidious march to infamy and human misery. The expansive and expanding list includes racism and xenophobia, the continuing oppression of women under a patriarchy in too many countries, the seemingly uncontrollable chariots of artificial intelligence, the threatening pandemics and the anti-people consortia of big pharma, poverty and food insecurity, ignorance, miseducation, and disinformation, terrorism and its associated malcontents, the illegal trafficking in persons and narcotics, the subversion of participatory democracy and human rights, the failure and/or refusal of former colonial powers to entertain just and legitimate demands for reparations, to repair the contemporary legacies of underdevelopment caused by native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, and the failure and/or refusal of the major emitters of greenhouse gases to cough up the requisite resources to the affected vulnerable countries for the required adaptation, mitigation, loss, and damage. And the list goes on. The heard melodies are troubling. Those unheard are damning. Excellencies, powerful countries and blocs of like-minded states are unwilling or unable to fashion inclusive and efficacious modalities through a genuine multilateralism to address the extant challenges facing humanity. They reflect actions in quest of a continuing imperium or an emergent hegemony are dressed up as self-serving calls for a new world order. All sauce and gall, but of little or no substance, difficult to swallow. From the rough trenches of the periphery, St. Vincent and the Grenadines poses yet again, in response, three haunting questions. What's new? Which world? And who gives the orders? In this context, the urgency of genuine reform of the United Nations Security Council is to be embraced after decades of futile bickering and foot-dragging. Surely it is long overdue for sensible compromises on this matter, reflective of the contemporary condition of our world. In these troubled and uncertain times, enveloped in limitations and weaknesses, there are nevertheless possibilities and strengths. The wise and mature leadership of this collective, the United Nations, is immediately required in this great endeavor to put things right for humanity. We gathered here as representatives of national or regional interests are not and cannot reasonably be agents of purely impersonal forces driving humanity inexorably to further peril and even damnation. Notwithstanding the imperfections of a multilateral system grounded in international law and civilized norms, we at this assembly, in concert with each other and our peoples, can be the fresh hope, the beacon, the light, not merely to inspire, but to draw out of each other and our respective peoples a goodness, a high quality and a nobility, which oftentimes we may not even know as yet that we possess. In the process, let us clear certain ideational cobwebs from our brains. It is, for example, wholly unhelpful to frame the central contradictions of our troubled times as revolving around a struggle between autocracies and democracies. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a strong liberal democracy, rejects this wrong-headed thesis. It is evident to all right-thinking persons, devoid of self-serving hypocrisy, that the struggle today between the dominant powers is centered upon the control, ownership, and distribution of the world's resources. The struggle has been and is about who gets what, when, where, and how. Civilized life and living now demands fairness, justice, peace, security, and prosperity for all. This civilized goal is unlikely ever to be satisfactorily attained if the strong and powerful continue with impunity to do what they can, and the weak and fragile suffer what they must, despite their oftentimes enfeebled resistance. Throughout history, powerful countries exhibit a certain schizophrenia. They possess and deploy all their instruments of domination, yet they are racked by bewildering insecurities, which frequently turn them into beasts of unreason to their own detriment. In this way, they overreach and sow seeds of their own downfall. In the process, sadly, they hobble humanity needlessly. Excellencies, let us accord mature consideration to a matter of immediacy in our America, to use Jose Marti's telling formulation. We urge the United States of America, our friend, the most powerful and economically dominant country since the dawn of human civilization, a nation which espouses humane values, to end its unilateral and oppressive sanctions and impositions that are contrary to international law, which have been rolled out against Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. It is also plain silly and factually incorrect to label Cuba a sponsor of state terrorism, a label prompted by partisan domestic politics in South Florida. But it hurts the Cuban people massively and unnecessarily. The sanctions and coercive measures against Venezuela, including the weaponizing of the US dollar, have caused the collapse of the Petrocaribe Agreement, which delivered substantial benefits to over a dozen Caribbean countries, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We in the Caribbean have thus become collateral damage. At the same time, Your Excellencies, it is long overdue for the Republic of China, Taiwan, to be brought in from the diplomatic cold. The magnificent Chinese civilization, through the fever of history, has delivered to the contemporary world in practical terms more than one recognizable national political expression institutionally. Surely, Taiwan's quest for participation in relevant specialized agencies of the United Nations is reasonable and ought to be accommodated. Repeatedly, Taiwan has shown itself to be a responsible member of the international community. Peace across the Taiwan Straits is an imperative for the prosperity and security of the world. Excellencies, on the bundle of issues touching on concerning climate change, global warming, biodiversity challenges, land degradation and desertification, there is a veritable Babel, a tower of Babel. There is an overabundance of sweet-sounding lyrics by the major emitters, but they turn out to be bitterly deceptive. A lack or insufficiency of meaningful corrective action by the irresponsible climate polluters, countries and companies, constitute unpardonable, egregious wrongs. Indeed, it is a species of barbarism. The upcoming Conference of Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in the United Arab Emirates is a critical test of humanity's commitment to save our planet from the ravages of man-made climate change. We know the oft-repeated benchmarks and the corrective agenda. I don't have to repeat them here. In this composite package of policies and measures, a special consideration has to be accorded the most vulnerable countries, such as small island developing states in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and the poorer communities in climate-distressed areas of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Excellencies, crisscrossing the issue of financing for development in the era of climate change and the downside ramifications of structural distortions in the global economy for poor and vulnerable middle-income countries is the Bridgestone Initiative 2.2. And this has already been endorsed by the Caribbean community, the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, the Association of Small Island States, and dozens of countries in the African Union and elsewhere. This progressive initiative contains creative financing proposals that would result in more resources on highly concessionary terms for the poor and vulnerable regions. The multi-dimensional vulnerability index championed by vulnerable middle-income countries include those in the Caribbean. This finds a place in the reform mix of financing for development. St. Vincent and the Grenadines urges a strong support of the Bridgestone Initiative 2.0 and the MVI by this United Nations General Assembly. St. Vincent and the Grenadines also endorses the initiative of the Bahamas to remove from the OECD, the Rich Club, any global authority it assumes for suzerainty on international taxation and related matters. Properly, they ought to be resident in the United Nations. Excellencies, developing countries must refrain from being mere prideful villagers, obsessed with immediate trifles and blind ourselves to the far more compelling issues beyond our individual control and which demand a unifying solidarity with others to confront successfully our travails. Poor, vulnerable, climate distressed, and resource-challenged developing countries are absolutely fed up and insulted by the unfulfilled perennial promises of the developed world on climate financing. Excellencies, in September 2015, at our United Nations, all nations signed on to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals targeted for achievement by 2030. Earlier this week, the bundle of issues centered on the SDGs were accorded a special consideration, and admirably, a refreshing of them has been canvassed. But the critical issue of a sufficiency of financing for development, including climate financing and reparations, remains the proverbial elephant in the room to be effectively harnessed to serve the deserving. Here again, agreed commitments entered into must be translated into real actions. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been insisting as part of the conversation on the SDGs that there must be a special carve-out for reparations from European countries for the legacies of underdevelopment engendered by native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, horrendous crimes against humanity. In this matrix, a special focus is required for Haiti. The case for reparatory justice within the framework of the SDGs is compelling and unanswerably strong. The time for reparations has come. This demand will not go away. Africa, the Caribbean, and our diaspora, and others who hanker for a just world insist on it. Excellencies, in our Caribbean community, one of our member states, Haiti, continues to be confronted by multiple existential challenges of immediacy, lodged in the political, security, social, humanitarian, and environmental domains. CARICOM is seeking to facilitate a political solution by engaging the widest cross-sections of stakeholders to fashion a government of national unity to replace that which is bedeviled by a lack of legitimacy and effectiveness, and to prepare the way for democratic elections in a suitable time frame. The United Nations Security Council cannot reasonably stand askance from this process in circumstances in which the criminal gangs, inclusive of those with links to the government and the national police, are essentially in control of the capital city. Security supports, not an imperial invasion, are required to accompany the political consensus so as to bolster humanitarian assistance, economic development, and a more orderly way of life and living. The situation is dire and growing worse by the day. We must not allow ourselves the luxury of Haiti fatigue. Indeed, the guns and bullets in the hands of the Haitian gangs are also in the bosoms of assorted criminals across the Caribbean and Latin America, and sourced mainly from the USA. The US, the Caribbean, and Latin American governments must work together more earnestly to stop this massive flow of guns and bullets. Across the globe, resolutions to wars and perennial conflicts are urgently required. The terrible situations, for example, in Ukraine, Palestine, several countries in Africa and elsewhere, cry out for peaceful settlements between the warring tribes. It is humane and wrong for the Palestinian people to be enduring colonial domination and externally induced suffering for decades. In our America, Your Excellencies, CELAC led currently by the pro tempore presidency of St. Vincent and Grenadines, is at the forefront of seeking to fortify our political cooperation and enhance integration efforts. CELAC is building vital bridges with several blocs across the world and countries. All this is designed to promote peace, security, prosperity, and sustainable development for all. It is vital that our shared experiences be translated into shared expressions, including institutional expressions, to get the practical work done to enhance life living and production for all humanity. And CELAC ought to be allowed to follow the African Union into membership of the G20. Let us be more inclusive in solving intractable problems in practical ways. I thus welcome the proposed initiative, the proposal of the European Union to initiate an institutional summit between the EU, the African Union, CELAC, ASEAN, and with the Secretary General of the United Nations. I await the details. Excellencies, the days of masters and vassals are over. The days of imperialism are drawing nigh, and the would-be hegemons waiting in the wings with their illusions of grandeur, past or imagined, are bound for disillusionment. In any new world order, the metaphoric lambs and the lions must lie down and rise up together in mutual self-interest and respect, and for a better world. This world of 8 billion people deserves better. We in the developing world reject the crumbs. There is a loaf to be shared reasonably, with equity, and we must be at the deciding and the eating tables. Those who think that we speak with our heads in the clouds are profoundly mistaken. We know that in the great cathedral of the sky, there is a sun for steeple. It illuminates our pathways. We see things clearly. Men and women who see things clearly will never give up in the pursuit of peace, goodness, equity, and justice. We do so with urgency, yet with a patience and a calm, knowing that even now the greener leaves explode, sun brightens stone, and all the river burns. As I conclude, a summation from one of my country's poets, Daniel Williams, is apt. We are all time. Only the future is ours to desecrate. The present is the past, and the past our fathers' mischiefs. In order to avoid the desecration of the future, we must be serious about the challenges at hand and work assiduously in solidarity to address them satisfactorily. To be sure, there is no perfection this side of eternity, but we can do better than we have been doing. Time is not on our side. Let us sleep not to dream, but dream to change the world for the better. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Legal Affairs and Information of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for the statement made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Fiame Naomi Mata Afa, the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the independent state of Samoa. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming Her Excellency Fiame Naomi Mata Afa, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the independent state of Samoa. I invite Her Excellency to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, and distinguished delegates. Samoa extends congratulations and best wishes to Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, on the assumption of the presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly. We are so delighted to see Trinidad and Tobago, our sister small island developing state, at the helm of our organization for the next 12 months. You have Samoa's full support in the successful execution of your mandate. It is an honor to address this assembly on behalf of the government and people of Samoa. We remain steadfast in our support of this multilateral institution and recognize that international cooperation is essential to fight for a just, more sustainable, and peaceful future for our people and planet. Whilst many global challenges remain, it is our hope that in the spirit of global solidarity and unity, we can address with urgency the threats of the climate crisis, the accelerated loss of biodiversity, the erosion of human rights and human health, worsening conflicts, the abuse of information and new technologies, and garnering the political will to strengthen our collectivism towards sustainable development. The theme for this year's General Assembly speaks to our priorities and helps to frame our continued engagement with our United Nations family. Excellencies, the effects of climate change are etching a deepening and more devastating impact on our lives. The first half of 2023 was characterized by record temperatures in many regions of the world, intense water temperatures in various ocean basins, droughts in parts of Africa, Europe, and Asia, severe flooding, as well as cyclones and devastating wildfires in Greece, northeastern Canada, and Hawaii, decimating lives and livelihoods to ash and barren landscapes. I extend Samoa's deep condolences to the people of Lahaina, Maui, families and friends who have been lost in one of the worst wildfires to have ever affected a Pacific Island community. Indeed, our sympathies go out to all those affected by these devastating disasters. But our sympathies will only take us so far, and we will continually face these ever-worsening disasters if we continue to deny addressing their root causes. Scientists have warned of imminent and more frequent and many more extreme weather events, resulting in more lives lost and costlier, less resilient infrastructure. Excellencies, June of 2023 is remembered for the warmest ever recorded global average temperatures, up by more than 1.2 Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. Efforts to reduce global emissions, such as investing in clean and affordable energy, moving towards green, resilient economies, tackling deforestation, reducing the reliance on fossil fuels and protecting nature must be everyone's priority for the sake of humanity. Targeted solutions must be complemented by ensuring climate finance for frontline countries and utilizing the best available science and technology. Our expectations for the upcoming COP28 in UAE include crystallized commitments to bring about our envisioned reality. In particular, we wish to highlight the importance of operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund as quickly as possible. For all AOSIS members, maintaining global temperatures below the 1.5 degrees Celsius is a point of no return. Crossing this threshold spells the end of many of our island societies. We view the climate crisis as an intersecting one, causing damage to the wider environment, such as the biodiversity that forms the web of life we depend on for our livelihoods and economic growth. More than 1 billion people rely on forests for their livelihoods, and land and the ocean absorb more than half of all carbon emissions. The climate problem is worsening as the world's natural carbon sinks, such as our oceans and rainforests, cease to spawn life. Samoa, as a core member of the SIDS Coalition for Nature, joins the crescendo of voices for the better protection of our biodiversity. Excellencies, the ocean is a vital resource for food and livelihoods, and hence requires responsible stewardship that is integral in maintaining our Pacific identity, as the ocean is in us and we are the ocean. The healthy ocean will help in our fight against climate change. As the Blue Pacific continent, we must ensure that our oceans can still provide for us as we sustainably manage our marine resources, ecosystems, and biodiversity. We urge our member states to assist in combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in our region, which deprives our small island developing states of much needed revenue in a time of increased fiscal stress. We believe in the interconnectedness of our responsibilities to our people and planet as reflected in the collective stewardship of our ocean and the goodwill that resulted in the adoption of the new treaty protecting biodiversity on the high seas. This is an important milestone in the path to sustainably managing the high seas and our ocean resources. So let us all sign the treaty for a timely ratification. Similarly, we are engaged in the ongoing negotiations on a treaty to end plastic pollution. The need to address the global plastic pollution problem, especially in the marine environment, is a priority as this is a threat to our ecosystems and health. Excellencies, non-communicable diseases are a priority area for Samoa and our Blue Continent. Currently, chronic NCDs are overtaking communicable diseases as the dominant health problem and are the leading causes of mortality, morbidity, and disability. At the national level, NCDs account for almost half of the deaths, premature deaths, in fact, in Samoa. We have one of the highest obesity rates, particularly among children. Current data, however, shows some positive trends in the falling prevalence rates of alcohol drinkers and increase in the prevalence of people who are physically active. These statistics are catalysts for programs to promote healthier lifestyles. The government of Samoa has made people-centered health services and NCD control a priority in its pathway for the development of Samoa of 2019 to 2025, and has also issued the National NCD Policy of 2019 to 2023. With support from its development partners, the Samoa government launched a comprehensive program in May 2020 with the aim to build people-centered and systematic NCD service provision to strengthen primary health care, empower communities, promote early detection and effective referral of NCDs, and increase population awareness of NCD risk factors. Samoa remains committed to the global fight against NCDs through scaled-up capacity building of all stakeholders, quality-assured data collection, and statistics for informed and forward-looking policy decisions, as well as strategic partnerships to mobilize resources and support. To help address the rising burden of non-communicable diseases, we believe that access to a balanced and nutritional diet is a national priority. It's important to return to locally produced, quality, fresh foods with less reliance on processed, imported foods. Nutrition and exercise in combination with other lifestyle changes will do more to curb NCDs, but these efforts must be enhanced by financial support for advocacy and capacity building of our health and educational professionals. We learned from the COVID pandemic experience that in the event of a global crisis, supply chain issues will disproportionately affect small island states in favor of larger markets. We targeted measures to enable self-reliance in terms of food production and responsible consumption, and the promotion of local food systems. In this area, we relied on our support from our partner agencies, such as the FAO, particularly in the promotion of transformative food systems. Excellencies, small island developing states, or SIDS, face a unique set of vulnerabilities which impede their ability to achieve sustainable development. Most SIDS, including Samoa, face high indebtedness, which is compounded every time there is rebuilding after a natural disaster. We know that natural disasters will increase in frequency and severity as long as climate change remains unaddressed. A multidimensional vulnerability index, therefore, will allow for the inclusion of more than just income-based criteria to assess eligibility for concessional finance. We are appreciative of the fact that the MVI is a tool that aims to create a richer lens on vulnerability, and as SIDS, we look forward to early endorsement and implementation of the MVI. Excellencies, we believe that there are a great many opportunities which arise from an increasingly digitized world, especially in connecting our people in remote areas. We need to take better care of our citizens from the very real threats from cyber fraud and cyber attacks. We need assistance in ensuring that our infrastructure and financial institutions are safeguarded against cyber threats and that we can build our capacity to address and combat these threats. In this regard, we are mindful of the ongoing work of the open-ended working group on security of and in the use of information and communications technologies, 2021 to 2025, which will report to the Assembly in 2025. Excellencies, we remain concerned that the war in Ukraine is still ongoing with no resolution in sight. We hope for a future of a world peace, free from conflict, high-tech cyber and electronic crimes, social media abuse and online child sexual exploitation, and threats of terrorism in any form. For a small island developing nation like Samoa, we rely on the collective responsibility of the global community to achieve this through international cooperation, compliance with international law, diplomacy, and with the UN Charter as our guide. Excellencies, we live in a highly contested region that is attracting intensified geostrategic interest. For small island countries in the Pacific like Samoa, security is more than geostrategic power. An expanded definition of security for the region reflects our desire to nuance our priorities and the demand for climate resilient and environmentally conscious infrastructure, rather than simply viewing them through a lens of strategic competition. In this way, we can ensure living in peace. As a small nation with no military force, we continue to highlight the importance of multilateral platforms and the UN in conflict resolution and governance. We believe in the rule of law, and we hope that respect for this principle guides us through the types of conflicts we see today. International cooperation is needed now more than ever. Building resilience at the national level can only take us so far. Samoa is confident that despite all the challenges, even existential threats for some of us, there is still hope if there is unity amongst our UN family. We have a moral obligation to change our world for the better and leave hope for our future generations. In closing, let me reaffirm Samoa's commitment to the United Nations and our conviction that it remains the foremost forum to address all issues that transcend national boundaries. We reiterate our call to the United Nations through its multiplicity of agencies to better understand our unique cultures, respect our diversity, and embrace our differences to help build a future we want through mutual and sustainable partnerships. Mr. President and Your Excellencies, I wish you all a successful 78th session of the United Nations Assembly, and I thank you again for this opportunity to address the Assembly.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of the Independent State of Samoa for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Terence Michael Drew, Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, National Security and Immigration, Health and Social Security of St. Kitts and Nevis. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Terence Michael Drew, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, National Security and Immigration, Health and Social Security of St. Kitts and Nevis. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is my honor in this my second year as the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis to join with members of the global family of nations and speak on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis at home and in their diaspora. I must first extend, however, condolences to people across the world who in a summer of scorching heat, the hottest in recorded human history, suffered every disaster known to humanity: fires, floods, droughts, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and with them untold personal, social, and economic tragedies. I especially extend the heartfelt pain of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis at the recent disasters in Libya and Morocco. We in St. Kitts and Nevis are suffering the worst drought of our history, resulting in severe water shortage. Of course, we have not escaped. Mr. President, I extend sincere congratulations to you on your elections as President of this 78th session of the General Assembly. Your election has given pride and satisfaction to St. Kitts and Nevis, and indeed the Caribbean community, and it stands as further testimony to the fact that small island developing states can contribute to positions of global leadership. Your term comes at a time of international complexity and conflict, of great global tensions and even greater global aspirations, of new geopolitical dynamics and even newer technologies which are transforming every aspect of life as we know it. These are times of great divide in income and well-being, combined with such growing insularity and loss of trust that it shouts the need for what Secretary General Guterres has rightly identified as the centrality of prevention, coordination, and partnership. St. Kitts and Nevis shares the view that this must be a period of prevention of the greatest downslide, socially, economically, environmentally, and of security for the people of the world. Mr. President, there exists an alarming lack of trust the world over. Lack of trust in state and global organizations, lack of trust in traditional media, and what some regard as its management and manipulation of information, and Mr. President, a lack of trust in the political class. In a world of distrust, the United Nations and its member states must show a sense of caring, inclusion, respect for the dignity of all to ensure we, the peoples, is a statement of unity and a clarion call for the word common to be truly reflected in how we view global commons and how we together achieve the agenda of the common good. If we are to rebuild trust and reignite global solidarity, leaders, particularly those in wealthier countries, must mean what they say and say what they mean. Developing countries are groaning under the weight of burgeoning challenges, not of their own making, and I would dare say some of which were inherited as a result of colonialization and transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were uprooted from their homelands and transported across the Atlantic in the hulls of ships to be enslaved on plantations. This was the largest forced migration in human history, and it resulted in great wealth for some at the expense of the lives and the humanization of African peoples. It must be noted that compensation was paid to plantation owners, while the survivors of this crime against humanity were left in suffering and were hindered in their socio-economic development. Thus, it is past time for reparatory justice. I therefore encourage all to work together constructively as partners in the pursuit of and respect for justice. For as Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The climate challenge must continue to be highlighted. The industrial behemoth countries and companies push SIDS and others to the front lines of climate change. They accept little responsibility for financing the adaptation and mitigation measures necessary for the survival of developing countries, which suffer the consequences of the lifestyles and industries of others. Consequently, countries like mine, which are unable to access concessionary funding, are forced to fix the climate crisis by obtaining loans at exorbitant rates from the very countries where the problem originated. Our carbon footprint as a country is very small, yet we face the existential threat of climate change. This is unjust. We therefore call for climate justice. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, there's an urgent need for the international community to address the gaps and shortfalls of the current international financial architecture, with a view to strengthening support for SIDS, in particular through a multilateral sovereign debt mechanism, meaningful reform of the governance of the international financial institutions, and enhanced access to financial resources. I congratulate the World Bank on recent steps in the right direction. However, there is still much ground to cover if states like mine are not to fail and our economies and societies are to remain viable. I commend the Bridgetown initiative of my sister, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, as having the potential to effect the kind of changes that are essential to ensure equitable growth and sustainable development. Mr. President, I see as an outcome to addressing the issue of access to capital, the development of a relevant and effective MVI, Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. I would like to caution, however, that to be effective, debt must be part of the metrics used for assessment and ranking of countries. Further, the risk and cost of wipeout environmental events, those which in a single event or series of events literally wipe out 5% of GDP or more, as well as the capacity to recover from such events, are all important metrics if the MVI is to work. Mr. President, at the national level, our government has commenced efforts to further ensure the holistic and resilient development of our communities. This undertaking is articulated in our vision to transform our country into a sustainable island state by 2040 and demonstrates the determination with which we take ownership of our own destiny and pursue our sustainable development aspirations. Our vision is buttressed by the 7 pillars: food security, green energy transition, economic diversification, sustainable industries, the orange economy, COVID-19 recovery, and social protection. These overarching areas include environmental sustainability, sustainable lives and livelihoods, health and wellness, and fiscal and debt resilience. To this end, we have made strides towards geothermal energy production and utilized loans from the CDB for this national development project, along with collaboration with groups such as the Atlantic Council and the PAC 30 initiative. Healthcare delivery and management have been strengthened. We have learned the lessons of the pandemic and are now better prepared for the crisis in health, even though the work continues. We are also building more transparent and participatory governance structures, as demonstrated by the passing into law the Integrity in Public Life and Good Governance legislations. We have also developed programs for the most vulnerable and marginalized, specifically women, youth, the elderly, the disabled, and the Rastafari community. We want to ensure that St. Kitts and Nevis leaves no one behind. Mr. President, we aspire to create a society where our people can live in safety and security. However, we are plagued by the scourge that is the proliferation of illicit and untraceable weapons flowing into our region. States that manufacture these weapons must take greater responsibility to combat the illegal flows that can threaten our national and regional security and can have devastating socio-economic consequences. We cannot win this fight against the guns on our own. International cooperation is necessary if we are to ensure the protection of our societies and our people. To this end, we thank the United States for increasing its collaboration with the region, with my own country, to deal with the illicit transshipment of guns and to buttress our overall national security apparatus. We must continue to work together to ensure continued success in this regard. Mr. President, it is of great concern that glaring global inequities persist and are growing wider despite sustained calls for global solidarity.